Thank you all for checking out this week's episode. Once again, I'm John. If you like what you heard and saw today, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out our brand new merch store with hats, coffee mugs, t-shirts, other cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Again, thank you all for support. Be safe, and see you next week.
How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spirit Talk. And today we get to finally welcome to the show Elle Adair. Elle is a retired active duty. She retired active duty as a Chief Warrant Officer of the U.S. Navy with over 21 years in the intel community, specializing in counter and human intelligence. She's associate member of the International Thriller Writers, and she's an award-winning author whose book series, the Elle Anderson series, the latest novel, Shadow War, is out now. And for those that are, once this episode airs, you'll now be aware that her debut album or debut book, Shadow War, is actually going to be in the book club for the first quarter of 2024, which is awesome.
It is fantastic. I love that you're doing that. The whole book club idea just in itself is phenomenal because you can never have too many books, but
yeah, it's one of those things where I thought about it because I'm like, I've had other authors obviously on the podcast, and whether it's they're actors or musicians writing books or scientists or survivalists or people hunting Bigfoot. And like every time I have a guest on, people will message me saying, oh man, what other books do you recommend by this author? Or, well, I'm like, well, the person's a human being. You can reach out to them and talk to them as well. But I'm glad I'm the vessel. And then I started realizing it'd be kind of cool to curate something every quarter where it's like people can kind of appreciate like some of the guests I've had on, while also maybe learning subject matter or reading a book they might not. Because I know a lot of friends that read the fantasy. Like I love Stephen King, and before I started the podcast, I'm not reading Tom Clancy novels or Jack Carr or any of that type of books because personally, having lived in part of that world, it never really fancied me. Like I just don't care. So like my goal was when I start the podcast that now I actually am engaged by it because these people are such unique writers and people like yourself. And I think it's a cool way to bring people together and make reading fun again. And as a kid, I hated book reports and doing those Venn diagrams and all that crap I remember when I had to read like Indian in the Cupboard. I love the book. I love the story. Yeah. But the fact that I had to do a project based on it, it just bummed me out because I couldn't enjoy the book. And so I read that book actually a couple of years ago. Again, I was like, I actually did love writing. And so that's why having an author like you on today to talk about writing and the process, and it's super rad.
Oh, I'm excited to talk about it. I was like, any myriad of those subjects, they're all fair game. I speak nerd fluently in multiple dialects. So yeah I'm all set.
I kind of want to jump in. I got to meet you through a mutual friend, Eric Bishop, who's been on the program once, and to get to know him and hang with him over the last couple of years. I think the good starting point for this podcast would be, I didn't realize how unique the writers community is. It's like you guys are always, whether it's you and Jason Piccolo or Jeff Clark or Steve Stratton or people in this thriller world or the writing world, you're always very supportive of each other. And it kind of took me aback because I'm so used to ego-driven people or people that screw you. I want to be the number one songwriter this week and I don't care about you. But the fact you guys are champions for each other is something really unique. Is that something when you first jumped in that you're kind of like, holy cow, like this is pretty cool?
It actually shocked me, like truth be told. And I think a lot of authors probably felt that way as well. They assumed it was going to be competitive. And from what I understand, you pick your genre, you pick your community, and not all the genre communities are the same, but we're very fortunate in what some people have lovingly coined the Thrillerverse, that not only do we all get along, we all really do support each other. And I think it's because we have a love of the genre. It's like, let's say somebody who's a big name, Jack Carr is one of the ones you threw out, Mark Greaney.
Yeah.
Even people who churn out books like crazy, you're looking at maybe a book a year. Well, if you're somebody who loves to read and you love those stories, you're not sitting around reading one book a year, you're reading multiple books. And so you want everybody to be putting out something great. So that's why, you have your favorites, of course, but in this community, you're just churning for the next story. And then we have a healthy level of competition. So we see something that's awesome. It's not oh man, this is my competition. It's I got to try to outdo that. My next book, I've got to up it a little bit. I got to see if I can, be on par with where that next bar was raised. And then, we support each other. And I think a good portion of that is because a lot of the people, well, at least in my case, are veterans also. So
yes.
I found my new veteran community. I retired, and that's one of the things everybody tells you is you find a new community, and I stumbled into mine. And one of the first people who reached out to me was Jeff Wilson, from Andrews and Wilson. And, I was stunned. It was just kind of out of the blue. And it's like, this is amazing. He just reached out like, hey, congratulations on your debut. Let us know if we can ever help. I'm like, thank you. This is amazing. And I do the same now.
They're super genuine. I had them on the podcast too. And Andrews and Wilson, the Valor series and all that. And it was because I actually had them on the show when they just kind of took over, I think, writing for the Webb Griffith estate.
Yep.
And it was super unique hearing them, because obviously two people writing the same book together, like the whole thing fascinates me, how you're able to seem like one voice when clearly you're two different people with different thoughts and backgrounds. And one of the things they talked about, you kind of just hinted at it, as you to up each book, it seems like the stuff they're writing about was happening right before it happened, whether it's the AI stuff or the war right now in Palestine, Israel, or Ukraine, Russia, like all the stuff that's happening. It's like when you go from the Shadow Warrior to Deeper Shadow to now Shadow War, this next book is like what's out there right now, where it's like the news clippings, everything going on in the world. Like it's just ripe for a writer to create a story based on what's really happening in the world.
It really is. And the inspiration or source material, however you want to look at it, it really is endless in this world. And it really just depends on where your imagination goes. Like you mentioned, not being able to read this type of stuff just because of what you did, which I completely understand. Because like for me, I can't do documentaries. It's too real. It's like fiction. Wow. Fiction, I understand. Like I will watch a documentary and I'll be interested in it, but it impacts me differently. And then same thing with like war movies, is like I will watch it and I will appreciate the art and what's going on, but I feel it on a deeper level. So I can usually only watch it once, which for me, I'm one of those weird people that can watch a movie like 20 different times, like plus, and still love it. So for me to only watch a movie once is a huge thing, but I feel it more keenly now. I didn't have that before service, but now I do. And I think because fiction is fiction, it allows you to have that escapism. It allows you to have that, like thrill without it being real. So you got to find that balance of, I want it to be genuine and authentic enough so you're not yanked out of the story, but still tell a story that's just kind of fantastical. So that way it pulls you out of your daily life. I mean, you think I would have learned by now, but I still watch the news, and I have to do like a mainstream media detox. So I try to stick just like with BBC World News. Like I try to avoid everything that's US based, and I will try to avoid reading anything I see on social media.
Right.
And I do find that helps with my mental health, but then I also I'm still compelled to know what's going on with the world, and I'm still compelled to try to analyze the details that I see in the stories.
Right. I was recently talking to Steve Stratton, and he was down in Texas doing research for his new book he's writing. Mm-hmm. And I get, for me, it's like, was your background, like when it comes to writing, how much of it started off as your career in counterintelligence? Like obviously you've lived in this real world, versus as you keep writing, more research has to be involved, versus all that. Like how do you find the balance as you further your writing career?
When it started out, a lot of it was just based on my imagination, my real world experiences. So if it wasn't something that I experienced or saw, I heard about it, I learned about it from somebody who was close to me. So it was very real, it was very visceral. But as I've gone through, especially now that I'm retired, a lot of those stories have evolved. Like 2 weeks ago, my 4th book came out. So this is number 4 now, A New Game. And it's domestic, and it deals with things that I never actually dealt with. So I took a lot of the experiences I had and kind of color the action in it, but I had to do the research. And like you mentioned before, when you're watching the media, I get inspiration from stories. And I have to research those more though, because it's something that I'm drawing inspiration from instead of living. So, film school right now, I had to come up with an idea for a feature length film. And the idea actually did come from a news article I read from the BBC. It's like, oh, this would be really great. And because it wasn't in my typical wheelhouse, I did have to go in and do a little bit more research. And now that I'm fleshing it out more, I've got to do more and more.
What does the research consist of? Like, I'm picturing you in a library taking notes. I mean, we're not thinking like microfiche here and like some crazy.
You're showing your age right there, like both our age. I actually know what that is too.
Yeah, I remember having to do that for research at my high school. I'm just like, this has got to be a better way. Like, thankfully, I mean, I think there's the cool thing about research is the nitty gritty, like grabbing the book and like smelling the book and like I'm grabbing encyclopedias. Like that was the fun part for me because I love note taking and I love the idea of like interpreting what other people are saying into my own views and stuff, like research and essays and so I'm just kind of enthralled by how other people take notes and research. Like, are you more of a write it all down, or are you like you in the back of a napkin one day you're driving, you're like, oh, I got this idea, I heard something on the radio, I gotta write this down before like how do you maintain all that research?
I have actually evolved that now because I am the person, and everybody's guilty of this, where you have that great idea. I'm like, oh, I'll remember it later. And then you kick yourself for not remembering it later. I finally accepted that my memory is not once what it was. And I use the notes app on my phone all the time now. So if it hits me, I don't try to title it. I don't do anything. I just pull it up and type it out real fast before I lose it. And then later go back and kind of look at it like, okay, is this something I could develop? Would it go here? Would it go here? I do start off with a lot of broad research. So I want to kind of do the macro level and then come into the micro. Once I have kind of a generalized idea of the subject matter that I'm going into, like prime example, one of the stories I'm writing right now has amnesia is a key factor. I know very little about it other than what I've seen in movies and such, and I want to get it right. So I started doing research about like the different kinds, how it sets in, all those type of things. But that for me isn't enough. It gets me going in the right direction. I am personally, like you mentioned earlier, there's human beings out there, and while I might not like a lot of human beings, I do prefer to talk to human beings, especially subject matter experts, so that way I can get like those nuances, those things, like you read it in a story or read it in a book and you're like, okay, I got the fact behind that, but the way somebody says something or how they value one thing over another, that all comes across in those interpersonal relationships. And you can't get that from a book. You have to have it from that interpersonal back and forth. And that makes it real.
Would you, in terms of, now I'm not saying you per se, because obviously you've got the retired and stuff in the military, but for people that start writing, they want to make an actual career of it. Like this has been their only job or whatever. How difficult is it to balance pleasure of writing versus a career? In terms of like, someone like you, I picture if no one were to buy your next book, you still wrote it because it's a story you wanted to tell and you're happy with it. Where I've met other people that if they were authors and no one bought their book, their whole life would change. And it's like, how do you kind of find that balance?
So it's going to be different for everybody. And most writers are going to tell you this. If you do not love what you're doing, if you don't love being a storyteller, don't do it, because this whole world, the business behind writing is so incredibly nuanced and frustrating that you could easily burn yourself out or just like get into your own head so much that you kind of lose everything. You lose your craft, you lose your desire, that passion. But if you love it, you can learn the nuances and just kind of ride the highs and just deal with the lows as they come. And then you persevere a lot easier because the foundation is the craft itself and not all the other things. Right. If you get into it looking to be like the next superstar, you're going to be soul crushed. But if you get into it because you love what you're doing, the rest of it will either fall into place or it won't, but you'll still be good with it.
When you do those like conventions or like the Thriller Con type stuff where it's like a bunch of authors together and you guys do your talks and book signings, like do you ever have a moment where you're kind of like 99% of these people are amazing, but that one author is just, there's so much ego and hubris and you're kind of just like, dude, you're not saving lives here. Like you're a writer that people appreciate and love and good on you. You got a talent, but like, stop it. Just because you're a major publisher and they're doing all your movies and TV shows, there's still great authors out there. I find that I would be perturbed by that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, how do you kind of navigate through that world?
I've been fortunate in that there's only been a couple of people that I've met that have been, let's just say, standoffish.
Yeah.
There are people who obviously you can tell they're on a strict schedule. They have to adhere to it, and it's not personal. But then there's others who are just like, I don't really have time to talk to you peons. Fortunately, those people are few and far between thus far, and you do it like anything else. You're polite, you're professional, and it really kind of makes it stand out in a contrast when somebody's being a dick and you're not.
Yeah.
So that way nobody can then turn around and say, well, it was because of you, or there's nothing that can be gained from that individual not therefore being nice back, or at least being considerate and polite, because then it showcases how much they're standing off. So it's kind of a battle of attrition where your quiet professionalism wins the day.
Right. When you're writing like the Elle Anderson series, is like you write the first book, and like, do you ever go back and kind of wonder why you put I picture as a first-time author and you're trying to create this series in this world, you never want to box yourself in a corner with a decision that's made in the book, because you don't know how an audience is going to resonate with a certain character. If this character is killed off in the first 2 chapters, or how do you kind of balance that where you're like, damn it, I wish I didn't do that? Obviously it served the story, but like, how often you kind of go back and like, man, why did I do that?
Actually, quite a lot. It's like there's a lot that I did not know when I started writing, and things that I take for granted now that I wish I had. So I made, I think, every mistake you could possibly make when I did my debut, but very, very, very fortunate that I did a developmental edit with my editor. I found her after a couple of failed editor attempts, and she walked me through everything. She helped me correct a lot of the mistakes I made. I mean, there's still a ton of them. I go back and I read my debut and I'm just like, oh, why did I do that? Or there's fallout from it in other books. Like, well, yeah. What? I'm trying not to curse, which is extremely difficult for me.
You can on here, but
okay. So it's one of those like, shit, like I did this in the first one, so now that I need to do here. So I kind of tie myself into it, but then truthfully, I kind of like those creative puzzles. I just wish I had taken a little bit more time and had a little bit more focus and direction when I wrote my debut, because then it would have smoothed the process out for, my second, third, and fourth book. But that being said, when I got to my second book, I was feeling pretty confident. I had a little bit of swagger going. I'm like, okay, I got this. I know what I'm supposed to do. And I turned in my first draft of my second book, and my editor just destroyed it. So that kind of that sophomore funk that everybody talks about, I lived it, because again, I hampered myself intending to write a trilogy and not thinking that I need to make sure every single book's a standalone as well. So you have to tie them all together so you could pick up book 2 and be like, oh, I know what's happening, but not alienate the people who read the first book by saying, why are you repeating all this crap again? So finding that happy medium, and you have to do that with each part of the series. Since I had planned everything out for 3 books, again, I kind of hamstring myself. So I'm like, well, I don't want to say it here because I'm going to say it here, and then I said that over here, so now I have to tie that in over here. It made for some creative challenges, and metaphoric red ink. I think I went through 10 different drafts with my editor before I finally got it to a point where everybody was happy. But again, I got punched in the mouth a few times, learned to bob and weave a little bit better. And the third book ended up winning the Independent Press Award. Yeah. So felt pretty fantastic about that. Was runner-up in action adventure at Killer Nashville. And I'm hoping, this book is also going to be as successful, because I feel like it's my best one yet. Didn't intend to write a 4th book, but my characters weren't done with me. I had these scenes that kept playing in my head and I just couldn't shake them. So I put pen to paper, so to speak, and book 4, here it is.
I had the honor of being your daughter last year. And I guess for you, have you noticed your writing changing as your kids have gotten older? Or is there certain characters you're writing about that kind of man, I need to, like, obviously with your daughter, having strong female characters and people in their lives, obviously real and fiction, role models and people like that, you want them there. Like, how much is someone like Elle Anderson trying to be a role model for daughters like yourselves or other kids in general?
Truth be told, that played a big factor in it. My daughter has changed my life in so many ways, and I know all parents say that, but
Yeah.
truthfully, I was that person that I was so focused on my career. Like when I was active duty, I was so focused. I was never one of those people like, I got to get married, I got to have kids. It just wasn't in the cards for me, that I couldn't even imagine a world where I wouldn't go back to work if I had a kid. And then I had my daughter, and it really did change me. And, I get hormones, all that kind of crap, but I struggled with going back to work. I struggled with going on deployment. I struggled with the choices I was making, because now it wasn't just me doing what I felt like doing. I was thinking about the ramifications it would have on her. And then writing the book, initially it was just a story I was enjoying. But then when I went to publish, I absolutely thought of her having a female action star, like a female action role model. I don't know if I would say Elle Anderson's necessarily a role model, but having
a kick-ass female that could get shit done. Yeah.
that wasn't wearing a spangly suit or, a fantasy character. Is like, that's really all you had. If you had a woman who was in kind of an action role, it was in one of those kind of genres. You didn't have necessarily a preponderance of, of spies who were kicking ass. You didn't have, the action hero who was a woman. I grew up wanting to be either James Bond or Indiana Jones, which are phenomenal, but they're dudes. Like, there was no female equivalent growing up.
I find that it's such a fascinating thing, because it's like, to your point, obviously I want to talk about being a female writer in your genre, which obviously is very unique. But when I was a kid, like, I remember, obviously I loved all the Arnold and Stallone movies and RoboCop and all that, but
yes,
some of my favorite characters, I never labeled Ripley, Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, as a female character, or Linda Hamilton and Sarah Connor, the Terminator franchise, as female characters. They were awesome action people for me. Like, I never looked at it. It was so weird, because as I got older, of like, people would be like, oh, she was a great writer, he was a great athlete, but why can't he just be a great person? And like, I watched those movies as a kid and just be blown away by, holy shit, this is a superhero. Linda Hamilton and Ellen Ripley are real life superheroes. It's not a man thing. It's not a female thing. They're just great characters that have to be portrayed by women in a male dominated world that seamlessly blend into their environment. And it's just believable. It's super rad. So kind of talk me through being a female writer and trying to establish a character in a world that is actually dominated by characters. I mean, you even look at I think John Wick 3 with Halle Berry's character, and it's like, sure, that franchise is amazing anyway, but to give so much time to a character like that, I'm not watching her because it's Halle Berry. I mean, obviously it helps that she is an established actor, but her character is so driven that you're not even looking if that's a man or woman, because it's such a great character. What the shooting and the dog stuff, like, it's super fascinating.
Oh God, I love the working dogs. I could watch them forever.
Yes.
But it was, you know what? And I think it's because, truthfully, I've been a tomboy all my life. So I kind of not fitting into that paradigm of, this is what a traditional gender role is. That's just kind of came naturally to me. So the military, yes, I ran into some hurdles because of my gender. But I was also that person who was constantly pushing that line. Like, here's the line in the sand. I would erase it and draw a little further, and erase it and draw a little further and further and further, until I finally started getting what I wanted to do. The ability to do my job. So for me, when it came to writing, same thing. It's a male dominated world, and I didn't want to turn off male readers or anybody who would pick up my book and go, okay, this was written by a chick. It's probably going to be able to, like, insert whatever adjective or descriptor here that somebody automatically assumes with a woman. So that's why I use my initials. That's why it's A.M. Adair, which my initials and my first name are identical. So that's kind of fun anyway. But I did that intentionally because I wanted somebody to look at the book and have it stand on its own without making preconceived judgments based on who I am. I find that it kind of My gender plays into my favor in a lot of cases because people don't expect things from me. I like being underestimated. That really served me well while I was still active duty. And now, people expect certain things from me. And once they get to know me and once they get a chance to interact with me, I like kind of blowing those preconceived notions out of the water. There's some fun in that for me.
Is it tough to write or read other people's books without getting ideas of your own to infiltrate like some of stuff you're currently writing about? Like it would seem for me where it would be difficult to, man, that was such a, I love that. If I was writing fantasy, I just read the new Stephen King book, which again is amazing. But then I'm writing my own book like that. I'm just like, I start seeing similarities between certain characters or characteristics, or whether it's traits or tattoo, stuff like that, where you're kind of like, how do you reset yourself after you read a book and continue to read or write what you're doing?
Actually, for the longest time, I struggled with that. I would get something in my head and I would want to stick with it. And then anything else where I kind of looked at as a distraction, but I eventually started treating it more like a palate cleanser, like a way to just reset the creative field, especially if I'm getting to a point where there's a weird transition or I'm just not liking the way things are going, shift to something else, get my mind thinking in a different direction, and then look at it again with fresh eyes. So instead of sitting something off to the side for weeks or months and trying to reattack it, that I could pick up a different book from a different genre. I could watch a movie that's not in my wheelhouse, or even one that's just different stylistically. And then I can actually kind of generate my own thought processes. It really doesn't matter to me if it's something that's super realistic or not. It's like just something that catches my attention long enough to yank me out of wherever I was. And then I can go back and look at it new.
Is it difficult to write about yourself? Like if you were to write an autobiography.
Oh my God, it'd be terrible.
Right. Because like I said to other authors before, they said the same thing. Like it'd be dead terrible. I couldn't do it. Like I'd be embarrassed. But do you find that somewhat with your career and obviously the military and the counterintelligence stuff, that the characters you're writing about is maybe an extension of some of your autobiography in terms of not necessarily like specific stuff, but like training or like movements or like dialogue type stuff or interactions you'd have? Is that safe to say?
It is safe to say. And I think every author, regardless of how hard you try, there's something of you that gets left on the page. And I think every artist could probably say the same thing. You put something of yourself on there. Now, whether that is a big piece, small piece, and intentional or not, it's there. There is a lot of me in each of my characters. So I've had so many people tell me that when they read my books, they hear my voice when Elle Anderson's talking. They hear me or they see my mannerisms. And I think that's just because they know me. And so there are certain lines that I probably have said. There's training that I've actually done, which makes it easier for me to describe it. And then there are characters in there that I have definitely interacted with somebody who's just like them in real life. So I can pull all those very real pieces, put them together. Now, no single character is necessarily a biography of me, but parts of each of them are. And yeah, if I wrote a biography or an autobiography, nobody would believe it. It would have to be like, the truth is stranger than fiction. Everyone's like, there's no way this is real.
Yeah. Is this a mockumentary? Like what's going on there?
Yeah.
Sometimes with people in your career, I know a lot of the guys I know from the Secret Service or like intel communities, when they write a book, they have to pass up a chain of command and it has to go through, hey, make sure there's no intel being leaked or redacted information. Have that ever happened for you when you started writing, or is it oddly you try to stay with the specifics of certain stuff?
I turn my book in for review with each one. Every single one's been reviewed by the Pentagon.
And who reads that book? Is there a specific job there that people read? Yeah. Oh, wow.
There is an entire department, is the Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review. And they read everything that anybody with a security clearance is putting out. Even if you make a pamphlet for like, you're going to go and lecture at a college or you're doing a trade show, they read through all that. And there's a section that's just for novels. And depending, this is my personal point of view because they haven't said it, but if you're smart and you know how to write for release, you're probably doing okay. But if you are, let's say, a SEAL, writing about a SEAL, your book is going to go through a higher level of scrutiny and
Oh
have
yeah.
potential redactions, because
Yeah.
even if it is completely fiction, because you're a SEAL writing it, they're going to look at it as like, well, somebody's going to believe this is real. And so there's that. Now, my protagonist is CIA. I was never CIA. So I have that kind of that extra layer of, well, this is obviously fiction because I'm not writing about a Navy person. I have Navy people in there, but they're not my main character. And then because I've signed, I've lost track of how many NDAs, and for various things, some of them are very restrictive. I don't even bother trying to war game out whether I should or shouldn't have to do it. I just do it. So that way I am covered. I have my approval for release for every single book. So that way, if somebody ever turns around and say, whoa, wait, how did you know about that? Well, you cleared it. I did what I was supposed to do per guidance. So my ass is covered.
I've read some books, obviously not gonna name names, where I ended the book basically thinking to myself, just because you did this doesn't mean you should write about it. And like, I don't know if that's, I think there's, going back to what we talked about, like the hubris and ego, that just because you were on a SEAL team or a Black Ops team or Blackwater, not taking away your actual, what you did and how you served, and hats off to you. We need more of you. But what entitles them to think people care? Like, that's why I'm always like, with people like you, with the background you have, or Andrews and Wilson, I genuinely care not only about the characters, but about the author, because it's genuine and there's actual talent there in terms of writing and being creative. So these people that write these books, whether it's, I'm not even talking about the autobiographical stuff where it's just like, dude, no one cares. But like these characters you create, it's like, why should someone care? Just because you're a SEAL, you think guys that love the military are going to read your book, or just because you were a mountain ranger, or like, it's super fascinating to me, like why people choose to write, because it seems very self-serving, that they just think that because they did what they did, people want to read about it. I mean, maybe I'm off kilter there, but like, it's just, I've always had that thought in my head, like, how do I talk about this without coming off as, because I respect them obviously, but for I
love team guys. I really do. I kind of view most of them like you would a brother. Is like, I will absolutely trash every single one of them to their face and tell them how horrible and messed up they are. But if somebody else does it, I get kind of like, hey, no, don't talk about those are my boys. But at the same time, I get it. You have to have a level of crazy and ego to be in that community. And so some of those guys, they really do believe that they are helping. And I heard, I think it was during an interview Jack Carr was doing with Mark Owen, and obviously he's got a lot of things, but this stuck out to me where they're like, how do you get people interested in being special forces or SOF if you don't give them something to go to reference? So if like these guys all got interested by going to the library and finding like, you know, Dick Marcinko stuff, you know, like way back in the day, and like kind of getting that imagination, that drive, that fire going. And so for them, that was, well, this is the only source of information I have on this super secret stuff. You know, when Charlie Sheen does the Navy SEAL movie, which was hilarious,
awesome.
Some of that's fairly accurate, but I could totally see them jumping off the bridge out of the Jeep. But that's when that's all you have, that's what you think it is. And so it creates this demand for like, well, what is it really like? What is it really like to operate and be a SEAL, and not in the fictional sense? So I think some of them get into it because they feel a duty to like, hey, this is what it's like. This is what it means to be a SEAL, and trying to like inspire and mold the next generation. Obviously, there's a fine line because you don't want to give away operational things, but I understand that now. I understand, like, I get it. You want the right people telling the right stories to get the right people in the future geared up to go to BUDS or, you know, Ranger School, whatever the case may be. But then there's the other side of that, in those who are in it purely for the self-interest. And I mean, you wear the golden chicken, so somebody's going to be interested in that. Somebody's going to pay you for it. So if you can cash in, there's plenty of people willing to sell their story. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I find it interesting too, because that's why I love the Andrews and Wilson stuff. Because obviously with their backgrounds, I pictured the first time I was going to read one of the books, like I used to always live on a submarine. I always thought it would be badass. But the way they write, I'm like, I hope they don't scare me to the point where like, I don't care about gauges, like all this stuff. And to the point too, where it's like the first early like Cussler books and like the Tom Clancy stuff I loved.
Mhm.
But then it got so crazy with like the nomenclature of rifles and the soles of boots and like certain knives. It's like how they're holding in their hand. It's like that's good for people that love that type of writing and like to smell their own ammo. But but for people, if you want to write to why write something that just how many females or kids are going to read that and be in love with it, or even other guys that are lawyers or doctors that aren't in that world? It's like, how difficult is it to write in such an open sense where you don't want to scare someone away that doesn't know what a gun is or is afraid of guns, loves thrillers, but they're used to Perry Mason types. Now you're going to put them in a world where there's AK-47s and cartels and all this stuff. Like, how difficult is it to kind of create a world that's engaging for everyone, where it's inclusive, like you're not just pigeonholing a certain category of people?
I think it's difficult only in the fact that you put so much brain power into it. So I think the key thing for everybody is to write your story. Just write your story. And then depending on how you want to be perceived, what your audience is, like what is your personal style going to be, and then you do your edits and your rewrites based on that. So once you get your story on your paper, you're going to kind of figure out like, okay, this is a little dark, or this is something that I think could be more broad appeal. And then you can easily tweak based on that. Like, so if you need to put in the nomenclature about, how many grains of, what is in this bullet that's going to do this and travel at this, frequency, right, or whatever the case may be, like that might be the story you need to tell. Like, I mean, if you're talking about snipers, chances are you're going to get into all the nitty gritty stuff because they love that. But if you're talking about somebody who is, fly by to the seat of their pants, picking up a weapon as they go, chances are you don't need the nomenclature because there's not a lot of thought going into that. So you see how that your story can kind of tweak that based on what you're going to do. And then if you're planning on your main audience being military guys, chances are they're going to like their gear. So sprinkle in some gear. If you're planning on having it be something that's selling to Hollywood, you're not going to write all that stuff in there because they're not going to care. You'll lose them after 5 seconds. So you're going to get into the action and you're going to show it because that's visually, you need it to be extremely visual. There's nothing visual about writing down the serial numbers on something, or, looking at, how this rebreather is different than this rebreather. It's a rebreather on screen. That's what you get to. So having that, you get into your voice and your audience. It's perfect.
It's one of the things I always do. I do judge books by their cover. And for you, when it comes to actually picking book covers, I know the new game book covers behind you. How do you set, like, what's the process between going to your illustrator or artist to kind of figure out the publisher picks what, because your books are very, like, the first book, Shadow Warrior, it reminded me of the actual film poster of Mercury Rising with Bruce Willis.
Ooh.
Like kind of like a shadowy, like swift movement. You don't know what they're doing, where they're heading towards. Like that resonated towards me. Like I love a cover that sells the book, because if I see a cool cover, I'm picking it up regardless. I don't care if it's Danielle Steele or R.L. Stein or whoever it is.
Ooh,
if it looks cool, I'm looking at it. Now, if I read the back and subject matter is Revolutionary War, goddaughter trying to rescue a soldier, I'm throw that in the dollar bin. I don't care. But for your process of creating book covers and stuff, like how's that work for you?
So I work with a team and they usually give me a questionnaire, and that kind of gives me my opportunity to put my thoughts and what tone, colors, things, anything that's popped in my head. And so for each of my books, I kind of chose a different theme. So the first one, so Shadow Game, because a lot of it took place in the desert, it's like if you really look at it, you can see like dunes. So like there's sand motif that's, there's the shadowy woman because my female protagonist, but then there's a sand motif. And then the deeper shadow, there's a lot of water in that one. So what did I do? I have waves. You can, if you look at the book, you can see wave motif. And then of course, I kind of blow everything up in the third one. So when Shadow War came out, it's all on flame. So I used a flame motif around that. Coming into a new game, so book 4, it's a same world, but very different story, very different set of rules, I guess, to follow, which is immediately kind of get me thinking and like, okay, this is a strategic game. So chess popped into my head. I'm like, okay, I want to have a chessboard. I want to have weapons, maybe a little bit of blood splatter. And I kind of threw that out there. And through that process, my graphic artist was able to come up with this. So you can, you kind of see where the gun's there.
Yeah.
And then, the king's got a bullet in him and you see a little bit of blood down there. I really like the way it turned out. But it's a collaborative process through each of it. And it all starts with me kind of telling my artist, here's the tone, here's the strike I want to take. And if, like in my case, I was like, I had a very strong, like, no, I want a chessboard. Like, give me a chessboard.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's like any type of creative outlet is a blast.
Yeah.
And I look at cover design as a creative outlet.
Is it difficult to write books, say with book 4, new game, and then maybe there's a book 5, whatever it is, it's like these people that write books to perhaps get picked up for a network or streaming or movies, like I find like the best books are the ones that, yes, if they do get picked up, great, because I love the visual component as well, but the books, if they were never picked up with their film rights or whatever, they still stand on their own and they're written in a way that I can still enjoy them. Sometimes I read books where, I'm trying to think of a series now that came out recently, not like the Golden Compass type stuff, but I think it was a fantasy series where the books started becoming like they're written for movies, and it took away from a lot of the detail, it took away from the story parts. The story like we talked about, where a TV show, or they're not going to care about, they can't waste 30 minutes on the nomenclature of a gun or tritium night sights. They have to get to the point. And I think these books started becoming very written for television or a movie, as opposed to before the first couple of books where you're like, this is such a great thing. If they make this into a movie, I hope they don't mess it up.
Well, I think that's one of those all-time debates, is because you ask anybody, the chances are you're going to hear somebody say the book is better. It's like,
all the time.
But then
you gotta read the book. Gotta read the book.
A ton of people who are like, I never read the book. I just watch the movie. If there's a movie, why would I read the book? So there's two different camps out there, but you have to keep in mind that depending on who the publisher is and who picked that book up, the publisher in a lot of ways will like try to funnel things. Like if that editor working for that publisher is like, no, this is going to go to like some sort of mainstream media outlet, it's going to get kind of tweaked to go that route, because their end goal isn't to get it out to be on the bestseller list. Their end goal is to get it transitioned over into a script.
Right.
And so they start moving it that way. But then the other side of that is, once a studio has the rights to something, chances are it's not going to be a straight stick adaptation. Somebody's going to take it and it's going to inspire their version of the story. So depending on who picks it up to do that screenplay, that's where we get that big like contrast between what everybody thinks is the book and then what ends up on the screen. So
when people are like, oh, you gotta read the book, I'm just like, I don't. I mean, maybe I will, but like, so I love Michael Crichton, and I thought Jurassic Park movie was better than the book. It wasn't until later on the book series where I kind of appreciated the books more. But then I watched Timeline or Sphere, and the books blew them out of the water. Yeah. And so, like, how do you, like, when's the last time you saw a movie that was based on a book or graphic novel that you're like, oh, and you already read the book or graphic novel, and you're like, the movie's better? How often does that happen for you?
It does not happen often. However, I will say that I can think of multiple times that I have enjoyed the movie to the like equal levels of the book, because they were equally awesome in some way. So perfect example, Harry Potter series. I love the books.
Yep.
But I also love the movies. And so they're not mirror images of each other. And I think it might have helped that I watched the movies before I read the books, but the characters are a little different. The action's a little different. Things happen differently. You get more detail in the book. So I love everything that played out on the screen, but then I can also still appreciate what's happening in the books, because it's more fleshed out world. There's more to it. I feel like they can stand on their own. Hunger Games, I read the books. I actually think I do like the movies better. Not so much in, like, I do enjoy the story and the more detail in the books, but there's less teenage angst in the movies than there is in the books. So there's less, like, Katniss committing suicide type stuff. I'm like, I gravitate towards the movies. So
Yep.
I think in a lot of cases, the shift in medium can actually enhance your story. It can, kind of weed out the things that make the book bog down, maybe, or make it have subject matter that you don't necessarily want all teenagers watching,
Yeah.
something along those lines. And it can still be phenomenal. It's just different.
When The Gray Man came out first as a book, and when it first came out as a book, I was like, I want to read this, but I never picked it up. Like I always say I'm too busy, right? Like we're never too busy to read 30 minutes every night. And I understand that now. But so I watched, when it came out on Netflix, I watched I think the movie, right? Yeah. And so I loved it. I was like, obviously the actors, the action was great. Then I was like, now I got to read the book because I love this movie. I went back and read the book and I'm like, totally different, but I love the book.
Yes.
And it was such
great example.
It was such an interesting thing where I'm like, if this wasn't a book, an original idea, this is an action film masterpiece. The only thing that brings it down a level for me is because when you read the book and it's like the original idea is such a great idea as well and story that like maybe there's one or two things I would have done differently in the movie to kind of make it at that same level. But it was an effective way for me to read the book.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my friends and stuff that, hey, have you watched The Gray Man yet? And like some guys would be like, oh, it was a book. I read the book first, I haven't watched it yet, or vice versa. Then we last holiday, we're all talking about like, dude, this thing is awesome. The whole world is great.
I think and that's a perfect example of one of those things is like, it's totally different than the book, but it's still amazing. And I can appreciate both. Like some people are truists, kind of get into the canon of something. And if it's not verbatim what's in the book, they don't like it. Well, nobody seems to comprehend that you can't do a movie that's verbatim to the book because that would be like an 8-hour movie. It's not going to happen. So you have to try to pull out the most visual pieces and make it work. And sometimes it's still great. Great example, Jason Bourne, the entire Bourne series, like the books, 100% different than the movies. Like the only thing they kept was the concept and the name. Everything else is different. Yeah. But they're still phenomenal. And I can't get enough of them.
No,
but I love both.
Yeah, it's so good. So I went to high school with R.A. Salvatore's son. And before that, I grew up reading like Terry Brooks books, like all that weird fantasy Conan and all that weird sword and sorcery stuff with griffins and centaurs fighting on covers.
Yep.
And I never strayed away from like the fantasy world per se. But I find it interesting as I got older, I started reading like thriller books or books based in like military or like espionage type stuff, where yes, the writing and the subject matter is obviously vastly different, but the character devices, a guy with a sword or riding a dragon is no different than the guy with his sidearm in an Escalade in a car chase. It was just weird how I finally came to the realization that fantasy, thriller, all these different subsets of what different categories of what books are, they're all when you come down, they're all the same nitty-gritty details. It's just their words and locations are so vastly different that it just blew my mind. I'm reading all these Terry Brooks novels, and then you go back, it's like, holy shit, if this was 1992, this is a Tom Clancy novel on a train in Colombia. But instead, I'm going through some weird Sumerian mountaintop fighting orcs and dragons, but it's the same type of concept. It kind of blew my mind.
And, it adds credence to, you've probably heard, the hero's journey, hero of Thousand Faces. It's true. And, good action is good action. It doesn't matter what world you're in, that you get drawn into those moments and that feeling, and I think that's why so many of us in the thriller genre like the genre, because you're going to get a lot of those, fantasy, you might be walking with a ring to Mordor for, 200 pages before you get action. But chances are in a thriller, you're going to get one like every 10 pages or so, like something's going to happen, something's going to blow up. And so you get a little bit more of that feeling. And I think that's why people choose the genres that they do, is it's not so much about a particular character, or, well, maybe it is. I like dragons, so I would pick up fantasy books that have dragons, but it's the feeling you get. So, people read romance novels because they want to feel like that, feeling of love or seduction. And, but people read thrillers because they want to blow up the bad guy and they want to enjoy car chases and that adrenaline rush.
When I remember when I watched Star Wars, like those movies the first time, and then I didn't realize they were never really books before. They became novelizations of movies. And when that happens, like, what are your thoughts on that? Because are they aiming to do like the reverse of what they now, since it's the same IP and it's the same name and logo and everything, we're going to make money off people reading the books now because they love the movie. Like, how often does someone watch a movie and be like, oh, I wish this was a book? Like, I don't know if I've ever said that.
I think it really
I
does
wish John Wick was a book.
Oh,
like,
but,
what? That'd be amazing. Write it. But I've never said that.
I have a few of John Wick-esque books downstairs, so I am that person. Be like, "Ooh, that's a John Wick book. I'm going to get that." Now, I think it does come down to the fandoms. You have to have a fandom for somebody to want to do a book, and generally, it's going to be to get into those nuances that you debate about. Game of Thrones. That's a perfect one. You know, the books are written and such, but then there's so many like blogs and discussion boards and fan fiction out there because people are trying to dissect all the nuances and things in there, mainly because they're waiting for George to finish the series. But because that, it creates that frenzy, it creates that desire for more information. So what does somebody do? Well, here, I'm going to do a deep dive and I'm going to write you, here's your who's who compendium. I'm going to write this other story that could have happened in this world, or if it was a choose your own adventure and the dragons didn't die, this is this type of thing. And people are so into that world, you want to keep that feeling going, so you'll buy it up. Like, oh, fan fiction, perfect.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there's been some crazy fan fiction with the Shine Down guys and like the artists and stuff I work with. These people's fans are super creative, but some of them are just super haunting. Like,
oh my God, really I can only imagine.
Sketchy stuff. I'm just like, guys, these are human beings with families. When it comes to you juggling being a wife, a mother, an author, other bullshit happens in life with everything going on, whether it's a pandemic or people sick or whatever going on, how do you find balance to stay like positive and like kind of like maintain your job is all these avenues?
Truth be told, I don't. And it's taken many years and lots of therapy for me to be okay with that. To allow myself the grace of not having a good day or having a moment where I'm just like, shit's going to fall to the side. I just not doing it, or I'm going to sit on my ass today. And I'm like, I started binge watching House again yesterday, and I've seen it a million times, but I love the show and I forgot how much I loved it. So I sat down and I was enjoying it, so I kept watching House. But allowing myself to have those moments and not kick my own ass for like, well, I should be writing right now, I should be doing X, Y, or Z right now. I sat down and just had a moment. And I think that does more for me long term than continuously cracking the whip and, you know, upping the anxiety or like maybe even putting myself in that OODA loop that just becomes self-destructive. So
crazy.
I just got,
I
know, be human.
Yeah, it's weird that you have to like be so like, I mean, it's like you always like, well, I guess I love like tragic heroes where it's like they get shot, they get hurt, they get cut up, maybe they're suicidal, maybe they're depressed. That's why I love a character like Martin Riggs in like Lethal Weapon, where it's like PTSD of a veteran and mental health and suicidal, and it's just like it's a real hero that I think more people resonate, which is why a character like that people love, because it's like it's a superhero. It's not like a Seagal character that wakes out of a amnesia or a coma and just starts chopping necks, which I love as well. But those aren't characters that's going to stand the test of time.
Agreed.
It's like it's super, and you can tell in your writing too that you have those human moments with your characters, which again I think allows the reader to feel like this. You get a closer attachment to the writings.
I appreciate that. I wanted it to feel real, but you know, and a lot things that I am passionate about. So, you know, mental health, I am passionate about. Like a lot of veterans are, because we understand how bad it is and what everybody's going through. But I put my character through some shit. And so she deals with it, you know, with PTSD and not in the conventional sense. I didn't want it to be another, substance abuse cliche of somebody ending up out on the street. You know, that PTSD is as individualized as the individual experiencing it. You know, a lot of the things are the same, but the experience for everybody is totally different. And so I wanted to make sure it was real, but it was real for my character. And, you know, a lot of the emotions she feels, I have felt. So writing in a lot of ways is highly cathartic. And it's about to get a little crazy because I think I just heard my son come in. So if I get invaded by a small terrorist, you're going to know why.
Yeah, book 5 right there.
Yeah.
Well, before I do let you go and stuff, and obviously I'm gonna have you on again because there's a lot to talk about. But if people want to pick up your new book, all your books, obviously you can find them on Amazon and stuff like that. But if people want to check out social media for you, and is it better for them to go to a website or Amazon? Like, how do you want people to find your books and pick them up?
The easiest thing to do is Amazon. That's the easy button. It'll get to you faster. But if you want a signed copy, you can go to my website. So it's amadair.com, and you can order through there, and I will sign it and I will send it to you. So it really is kind of a dealer's choice. Audible's only available on Amazon or through audible.com. My first 3 books are on audiobook, and I will be getting book 4, a new game, up on Audible as well, just because, again, I'm a nerd and I really like that stuff.
No, I love it. This was a blast, Am, and thank you for taking the time today. And I can't stress enough for people to actually get out there, read your books, and follow you. And I think your Twitter account's amazing because you're very engaging with your followers as well. And I think it's important to use social media in a very positive light, given everything in the world right now where people are telling you how to think and who to even trust and stuff. So I think the way you're doing it, and it goes back to what we talked about, the writing community on Twitter, is super impressive. If you follow one author, they're 5 more are going to follow you, and 5 more you're going to buy their books. And again, it's super cool to see you part of that. And I wish you all the success.
I really appreciate it. It's so good to talk to you.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, hello. I'm just enjoying this nice fucking candle. Anyways, I'm John, the host of Spear Talk, and I want to talk to you about nice fucking candles. We are lucky to have Nice Fucking Candles as a sponsor of the podcast. And if you use code SpearTalk15, you get 15% off your first order, or use the affiliate link below to always get your candle needs through Nice Fucking Candles. Nice Fucking Candles are 100% soy wax. They have a 65-hour burn time, maybe more if you nurse the flame a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not an expert on flames or candles, but I will say these things burn a long fucking time. You ask me about the wick. It's a double wick for even burning, which is amazing. And they come with 3 incredible flavors. I'm not sure if you're going to be eating these candles, but if you do like them, the scents are eucalyptus and ginseng, tobacco and fireside, and seaside and driftwood. Once again, Nice Fucking Candles. They are the candle company for Spear Talk. And if you love candles and need a good scent to clear out your office, your room, your podcast room, your weight room, whatever you're doing in a room that smells like crap, use this candle. It's amazing. Thank you. Check them out. Love Nice Fucking Candles.